right? And so the purpose of today is really that we have a conversation so you can get your questions answered, and we can sort of help break down some barriers for you. You'll see on the slides questions that came from your answers to our pre-survey. So this is the beginning. This is some starter points for the conversation. But if you have something that's really burning, or if you have a use case that you're really interested about, or if you're just really confused, like, please engage. Let's make this a conversation. There's just too many of you to put it in a big circle, but the goal is that this is an intimate conversation with some amazing experts in this field. To set the bar just a little bit, we'll practice this interactive element just a little bit. I told you there weren't going to be any meet your neighbor exercises, but we are doing interactive. So just a show of hands, who here has never been in AR or VR, augmented reality or virtual reality? Never been. Okay, so we have a couple. Don't feel bad. It's emerging. What if you have had some experience with AR or VR, but it was on somebody else's gear? Wow, most of you. Oh, awesome. Okay, and who here has their own AR or VR gear that they know of? That's a great question. We'll get to that. I'm sure we'll get to that. And who here has designed, built, or tried to design and build AR or VR experiences? Okay. Awesome. So we're all over the board, and that's really where the industry is. So this is perfect, right? This is the right time to be having this conversation, and we have some really awesome experts here to join us. One last thing, you will note we sure like social media. Right now, one of the major channels for augmented reality is social media. There's the DWPDX hashtag to tag it for Design Week Festival. You'll see handles for Mug of Paul and Amy LaMeyer. Feel free to tag us. We love it, and we love to share these insights. So without further ado, I'm going to bring out Paul Reynolds and Amy LaMeyer. Paul's going to introduce Amy, but for those of you who don't know, Paul is the CEO of Torch, and he's actually one of the few people who has 12 years of experience working in augmented reality, which most people think is about a 5-year-old industry. So without further ado, here's Paul and Amy. Bring your questions. Let's have a great conversation.
Leave it on. Hello.
Hi.
So thanks for doing that survey. It's good to hear. We got a nice mix of experience. Before we get started on anything, I want to set some terms real quick, and Amy can correct me or add if I'm wrong. So I just want to a lot of times you hear people say AR/VR, VR/AR, and kind of lump them together. So the first thing I wanted to cover is the similarities between the two, because there's not a ton, but there's some core similarities. And really, if you just think about these new technologies are using computer vision and sensing to know where you are in the physical world, and using that information to allow you to navigate 3D visualizations and oral 3D audio experiences. And so that's why a lot of times you'll hear VR and AR lumped together, because we're kind of experimenting with knowing where someone's moving, where they're looking, how they're interacting with this virtual content. And at the technical level, a lot of the underlying technology is really similar. But at the experience level is where it gets really different. And so VR, you're covering usually your field of view and your hearing. And so a lot of times you'll hear that called more generally immersive, because we're completely taking over your senses and immersing you in a totally different world, even though you can freely move around and we know where you're looking and your hands are. And then you've got AR, augmented reality, which is trying to integrate the real world more and less about totally digital content. And a distinction we wanted to make as well is within augmented reality, you have mobile augmented reality, which is kind of a weird term because all of it's mobile.
Yeah.
But what we really mean is smartphone-based AR. So that's why I think Nathan kind of set you guys up with that question because you're all carrying AR devices right now. So yeah, the modern smartphones are really capable, and they're a great stepping stone towards probably what you've seen a little bit in the news, which are goggles or glasses, which really let you see the real world as you normally process it. And we're layering in digital content with that, including audio.
And on that point, I think a lot of you that were saying you're not sure if you've used AR, if you've ever used a Snapchat lens or anything like that, you've used AR.
Yes, a lot of people don't realize if you've done any kind of filter or effect in Facebook, Instagram, or Snapchat, you're one of the hundreds of millions of people every day that are interacting with AR. And then you can actually get even more broad with that term. Snapchat's talked about this new thing where you can visually search for things. You long press on a real world object and it'll actually search and tell you what you're looking at and give you results around that. That kind of fits within, I think, that AR spectrum. So that's where we're going to stop it, because if there's one thing in our industry, people in our industry love to do is argue about terms and acronyms, and there's mixed reality, and so so if VR is kind of immersive, a lot of times we'll just kind of bucket all the AR stuff as spatial or spatial computing, but again, that could also be applied to VR in a lot of ways. So we'll use these terms, but again, kind of back to what Nathan said, if anybody's not clear on what we're talking about, because I think we're in the weeds on some of this stuff sometimes, so just please ask what that might mean.
Just the last thing I wanted to clarify is ultimately, at least in my mind, what I'm looking for is smart glasses to use AR. And so that, I usually carry my glasses with me, but literally something like, the glasses that many of you are wearing, having a digital overlay on reality, but being able to wear something as easy and light as those are. So ultimately, getting there and being hands-free and screen-free and heads-up is a longer-term vision for augmented reality.
Yeah.
Just to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. So let me introduce Amy, because we're really lucky to have her here, and thank you for traveling to spend some time with us today. And I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. Amy LaMeyer is a partner at the WXR Fund, supporting early stage companies in spatial computing. Now you guys know what that means.
VR and AR.
Artificial intelligence. She's an investor and advisor in startups in cybersecurity and music tech. Amy's on the board of the AR/VR Academy, which promotes diversity and emerging technologies through education. She writes for Virtual Reality Pop on topics such as concerts in VR and creating enteringvr.net to assist others to learn about the potential of AR and VR across industries. And she loves music more than most things. And I think that's, a lot of your effort is around, and I think that's one thing we have in common in this space is around helping people grok what this is, what are the opportunities, how do I get into it, and really that's kind of the whole point of what's going on today.
Yeah. Yeah, so it really is, just to kick off, an exciting time. It is an emerging technology, it being this vague spatial computing concept. It's like the dawn of the internet. It's like the switch to mobile. It feels the same. It feels very similar to that, and that's ultimately what sparked my interest, and that's hopefully what has brought you guys here today too.
And you have a background in, you saw that with the internet in your past career, right?
Right. So I started off my technical career at a company called Akamai Technologies, which helped to build the internet, essentially scaling and making it more reliable, pushing content to the edge. And it still serves, Akamai still exists today, and it serves, I think, a third of the internet traffic over the hundreds of thousands of servers across the globe. But when we were building it, Tony and I, and many hundreds of other people, we knew that it was going to change how people communicated and how businesses worked together. We didn't know exactly how it would be. We didn't ultimately foresee. Well, we knew streaming would be hot, but we were trying to build it in '99, but no one ever really used it until 2006. But we didn't know ultimately all of the things that would come from it, to mobile, to Tinder, to Uber, to all of these things. And that's where we're at today. And that's why you guys are so important. You guys are designers. You're creative at your soul, and you're gonna, as you start playing with this new technology and seeing what it can do, you guys are gonna be the ones that are pushing the boundaries to figuring out what this next platform of computing is. So just as you're doing it, as frustrating as it might be at times, like, enjoy it and know that this is the next step, right? And you're in the midst of it.
Yeah, and give a little more context to that around the Akamai. Think about when we finally got graphical web browsers and we were starting to, like, even as a kooky little niche community, we're getting web, and somebody figured out they could embed a postage stamp sized video on a web page, and somebody's like, oh, this is kind of cool that I could put video on a web page. But then, like, Disney wants to release a movie trailer on a web page, and back in 98 or 99, and you realize that you're on a house of cards technology wise, and that's where Akamai kind of built a business. And that's that was that's kind of the point, is that we've got enough endpoints, we can see enough complete value that we all agree that there's something interesting here, and now's the time to iterate and be some of the ones that find, like, what is that equivalent of that. A video embed in a web page was a pretty big deal at that time. Like, who's going to find that? And then not only that, once everybody kind of we all collectively agree that we want that experience, whatever that is, who's going to build the technologies or the best user experiences around it? So the opportunity is huge. It's really a blank slate, right?
And to your point, we all agree. And not only do we all agree, but all of the big tech companies agree. Like, every single major tech company has some play in the spatial computing space. From, Facebook has, or multiple, right? Oculus and Facebook Spaces, and even Alibaba, and globally Samsung. So, like, no one doesn't think it's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, every major computing company has AR on their roadmap in some fundamental way. It's not some experimental thing. They're all investing very heavily in it. So the other thing I want to touch on, that blank slate bit, was, like, first of all, acknowledging the audience. We have a great representation of people and genders, and the other interesting thing that I wanted to just kind of raise up really quickly is your current focus on WXR, which is focusing on empowering females in this new space and funding these companies. And so that's the other exciting part of this blank slate, not only designing new consumer experiences, new ways we're going to interact with technology, new ways of commerce, but, like, new ways of conducting business and who we support in that ecosystem, right?
For sure. And I was at a panel last night at 52 Frontier?
52 Limited. Love those guys.
Close. But it was about women in the XR space, and, that's a great, they were talking about it as well, which is, this is an opportunity. We're building a new technology for all of humanity, and so therefore it should be built by a diverse group of people, because we're building it for a diverse group of people.
Yeah. So again, we could keep going with this, like accessibility. Like, we finally get the opportunity to all these things that we've learned from mobile and web and just digital interfaces. Like, this is really your opportunity to help us get focused on these things sooner, so they're not these afterthoughts.
And that goes to ethics as well.
Yes. Yeah. Same.
Just ethically.
Was it the Mirror World article in Wired where they talked about this new opportunity to reinvent computing is great, but if we carry over the attention economy that we've established in current social timelines, that it could be really not great.
Yeah. I talk about this with a lot of folks, actually, which is, there's a part of me that wants us to have all of the technology right now and be able to use it and be fully into it, but then I realize that we actually need it to progress over time so that we can figure out some of these problems, and not wait until the technology is out there and then discover what the problems with the technology are. So,
Yeah.
from privacy perspective and all of those So,
So hopefully we've gotten you guys excited about the opportunities.
Yeah.
The next question I wanted to get into was, because we get it more and more every day actually, people just coming to us cold and saying, how do I get into this industry? How do I get started? So do you have any kind of thoughts around that?
yeah. So what you do is you download the Voices of VR podcast. There are only Kent Bai is from Portland. He's somewhere
Yes.
in this city. There are only 753 episodes.
So every day for 2 years straight?
Yeah, literally though. So when I left Akamai, and the reason that I left Akamai is that I saw this new opportunity and I knew it was the future of computing. And that is literally what I did. I listened to Kent every morning for months. And then, by the way, when I met him, so embarrassing because I was such a fangirl. Yeah. So, but seriously, there's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of, to your point, a lot of great communities, particularly for women. So for any of you out there that are interested in joining that sort of community, definitely talk to me later, and I'll give you some suggestions. Actually, that's part of the reason that I created the enteringvr.net website, because as I was learning about virtual and augmented reality, I wanted to make it easy for other people to learn about it. So the website has things like, here are the podcasts to listen to, here are the conferences to go to, here are the newsletters to sign up for, here are the books to read. That needs to be updated because my book isn't on it. And so it's really just kind of a basic guideline to how do you start digging in.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a great time because it's all new. We're all, I mean, other than Paul, we're all new at it.
That 12 years was a lie, Nathan Bowser.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 3 for me, and it's still changing every day. Someone coming in now would be just as much of an expert in a year than I am.
Yeah, and I think honestly, in some ways, we were almost too early. Like, I mean, we're enthusiasts. We got started in this years ago, but it's still early. Is the whole point. So. There's a lot of opportunity there. So that kind of, as an individual, if you're looking to get into this or figure out what it means to you, those are some great tips. So then that kind of naturally leads to companies. Like, I think the way that it's phrased is, what are the big opportunities for companies that are even considering these kind of, in particular AR, what is out there? How can they get started, and what are the use cases?
So for AR, I'm seeing a lot in, and feel free to jump in as well, but I'm seeing a lot in advertising, in entertainment for sure, e-commerce, right? So the first e-commerce ad, I think it was Michael Kors sunglasses. Mm-hmm. You could actually try before you buy. And Lowe's is using it for how do you fit furniture or color paint or something like this. Like, there are a lot of them. Wayfair. So retail, e-commerce for sure. Oh, Sephora. Great. What lipstick looks good on you? All of those. Entertainment, of course, on the AR side as well. As you start talking about VR, it expands a little bit more into training. As we talk about AR with smart glasses, you'll see that used more with training. Again, that concept of you're having digital information in front of you rather than having to look it up in a book or on a laptop, and you can actually function and train on a piece of manufacturing equipment, say, which is super useful and reduces a lot of time to effort.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. Like, companies interested in, they find us because they're at Torch because they're interested in getting into this, and we seem like an easy on-ramp versus what would have been like become a video game developer, which is totally out of a lot of people's interest. So I agree with that, and I think the key to think about when you're thinking about use cases that apply to you or your ideas or your company, the real opportunity here is, especially just talking about AR specifically, is tying a layer of story and experience on the physical world and helping someone get something out of being in a space. Think about the power of combining data and digital interaction, but also you've got the physical movement and some awareness of the space. Like, even in Torch, we don't do a ton of this yet, but we at least detect the flat planes in the room, so we can kind of say that's a floor, that's a table. You can say those are walls. So like even with that little bit of information, you can start to think about what might be possible. And I think yes, same thing around marketing and branding, which again, to go back to this idea of are we seeing the same cycle we saw with both web and mobile? You know, you've got companies and agencies in particular looking to stand out, and they see this technology especially accessible on the social platforms. So you've got over 1 billion daily active users on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok, and they all have some AR capability. So these companies are looking to like stand out in these marketing activations. We were down at the Snapchat Partner Summit last week, and like there was the CEO of Geffen Records, there was people from Warner Brothers. They're all looking. So it's all, you know, it, again, I always get back to this point of like, if you think about the progression of the web, it was like the web was this kind of oddball thing. You know, I don't know what to do with it. And then all of a sudden it became, we got to have a web strategy. And then it became, and it was a strategy usually around marketing. And then
Yeah.
it became, we got to have a web transaction.
Right.
We got to have business on the web.
Do you remember the pain of loading a website on your mobile phone?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there was a mobile website,
yeah.
which there still are today. But then it became an app. Like it was just inherent in the hardware device that you were using. So
Yeah. We used to tell the story about like the if you accelerated the timeline, you could almost see a business going, what would we use the web for? And then it turns into we got to have a web strategy, and they're like, well, we've got to have a mobile app, just so when you search for our company name in the app store, there's at least something. But those are such lame apps; they didn't do anything.
No.
And then, like it would literally open their webpage
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
and then they finally, and it really comes to the businesses and the use cases are going to follow where the audience is, and that's where they're going to put the money. So I think that's why, and ultimately that's where the flywheel starts.
Yeah. Can I tell you about one of
Oh,
my
please.
favorite AR apps
Yeah.
right now? It's called David Bowie Is. Because remember, I like music more than most things. But in Brooklyn, there was a museum that had, after Bowie passed, an exhibit. It sold out all the time. I went twice and tried to see it, couldn't see it. And eventually they had to, it was a traveling exhibit, so they had to shut down. But Sony was thoughtful enough to create a mobile experience, an AR experience, that means that we can now go to that exhibit all the time. So I highly recommend it. It's a little pricey for an app, but it's totally worth it. There are 400 pieces of artifacts in this exhibit. There are 56 videos. There's spatial sound and audio, which is delightful. And it's not going to replace a museum, but think about the 16-year-old in Enid, Oklahoma that loves Bowie and is never going to be able to see this in whatever museum it's in, right? Now she can go there. I could go in, I could look at the Space Oddity lyrics and the sheet music and like scroll in and like look at his typing. I'll never go to a museum again and not think about how it could be in AR, right? So that's just one example of how things can start to change.
Yeah, and I mean that's actually kind of tying it back to how does this turn into practical use cases. You could imagine that for like retail, for example, like one thing we like to talk about when we talk to like consumer packaged goods people is they don't even want to hear about selling their product virtually. Like the digital, there's a term called digital twin where you take your physical product and you have this virtual representation of it, and you can use it for a lot of stuff actually, and so that's another thing to our benefit. You can use your digital twin in marketing materials and also these experiences, but they're not trying to replace the store that they've invested in or the identity they've invested in, but what they can do is add a layer of experience that either attaches you to the product faster because you know a little bit more of the story behind it, which is really powerful. Like how many of you guys are really loyal to your brand because of the mission of the company or the story they tell or the collaboration they did? So you can imagine the frustration of someone in that industry, and maybe this is some of you guys. You put all this work into a product and craft story around it, and then it just gets kind of stuck on a shelf, and who knows where on the shelf it is and what the sales associate's going to tell the person coming in about it. But you actually get an opportunity to draw the person into your story a little deeper, and have them in the physical space. Which I think that's the other thing. We're not going to prevent shopping malls from dying. I don't know, but but there is something interesting about when you're in control of the physical environment. The more you're in control of the physical environment and the digital experience, that's when you do really magical stuff and really delightful things, right?
Yeah, so WXR is not only fun, but it's an accelerator. And one of the accelerator companies is called Obsess AR. And they're a e-commerce site, and just a couple different things that they do. So you can look at the object in 3D, which is, again, much better than a photo or even a video. You can, if you're in the store looking at the shirt, you can transform and have a model in front of you walking around and seeing that model in 3D. And the other thing they have is you can be in any space and bring up the things that you're trying to sell. So like we could have a store right there. So again, these are just some of the things that are starting to be created in augmented reality.
Are you? Do you have any more specifics around companies that have been the early adopters or taken this in what they've seen out of it in terms of ROI or value?
I don't have ROI numbers. I did. Those are hard for people to share, but I can tell you that Levi's used that technology, Anheuser-Busch. The Gap has used those mirrors, the AR mirrors. Yeah. So if you walk up to them, and have there's an article, you can see yourself in that article of clothing, right? Just by looking into a special mirror that's been created. I actually don't even know how that's done, but it's magic.
Magic.
It's magic world. The ROI, I think it's a case-to-case basis, as it usually is.
Yeah, I think we've done a little bit of research on our side, and these are early studies, so we don't have a ton of data points, but we are seeing that people are more engaged, and it could be just because it's a new, novel technology, and they're actually maybe more enamored with the tech itself than the experience around it. But I think, again, you think about how web and mobile, like, back to I got a little PTSD of like my first iPhone, and I was like looking for any app I could find, and that's how like the koi pond guys were making $100K a day off people downloading their silly koi pond app. So I think we're kind of in that same we're in that same mode, right? We're like, we all think this is we all know we all deeply sense the transformative potential, and we're looking for examples of that. And that the example cases are starting to get more and more compelling, and people are sharing data a little bit more. But we are seeing, if it were a total flop, especially right now, because it's really expensive to build some of this stuff using the old ways, especially some of those video game workflows. So if some of these companies weren't seeing any kind of return or results out of it, they wouldn't keep doing it. And we're seeing more and more people just add it to a part of their strategy, especially on the marketing side. Tying it to your business is a little more difficult. Again, it kind of goes back to the web and mobile once again of people are going to be willing to invest the money and time into being present, having their business present on these platforms when there's enough people to actually acquire through that.
I did find some stats that I wrote down this week. So House said people are 11 times more likely to buy using their AR technology. And then Lowe's was doing some VR training in VR. And they said confidence levels and ability to function was 150% more. So training, that's more on the virtual reality side than the augmented reality side, but training is actually a huge, huge space, particularly in virtual reality.
The reason why training is big, if you think about it, especially these complex training scenarios where you have on-site instructors and you have people in a physical space, it doesn't scale very well. So like my favorite example of that used to be trauma emergency room training, where they actually put these doctors through these scenarios where there's live actors causing, like there's like everything from the the frantic mother beating on the glass of the emergency room while you're in there trying to concentrate on the exercise just to distract them and get them kind of desensitized to that. So you think about the cost and setup in that for live actors. So VR just kind of turned that into a totally digital thing. So now you can do it, not only can you scale it up to lots more people quicker, you can control the scenarios, you can get analytics out of it. I mean, it's like that is a really good example of the digital replacing the physical in some ways.
Absolutely. And there's a company called Conquer Experience. They have Parasim, which is training nurses how to function in an operating situation. Interesting for many levels. First of all, they're making a great amount in MRR revenue, which is good to see and somewhat rare in this emerging tech space. But also interesting from that whole gender perspective. So lots of different applications out there for doctors and surgeons, but there are way more nurses in the world, and they need training too. And so just a huge opportunity that a female founder saw and was like, oh, we need to help them do that. It's just a great example of a couple different things we talked about.
MRR is monthly recurring revenue. So that means you're selling.
Yeah.
You're selling at people are paying you on an ongoing basis, which is a huge validation that you're putting something of value out there.
Yeah, I was talking to her in Seattle last weekend, and she was saying hospitals have the headsets there, but they were literally sitting there idle. So they're ready for the technology.
Yeah, we kind of hit that little peak, especially with VR in particular. We hit this that first gen, like the Vive came out, the Oculus Rift came out, the consumer version, and a lot of people, like companies, picked up a headset, like this is the future, and then it kind of sat because there wasn't a ton of things for them to do with it. But I think we're actually, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on it. My sense is that we're going to see an uptick of that this year. There's some new devices coming out that are a lot cheaper, portable, accessible, and a lot of the creators, experience creators, application creators are anticipating that kind of second wave.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a new headset coming out in a couple months from Oculus called the Quest, and it's a 6 degree of freedom. Oh, more terms.
That means they track your position, your rotation.
You can walk.
And so it's not just looking around, you can actually walk around and look around.
Yeah. But that's untethered, which means not connected to a $2,000 laptop. I think they said $399 or something like that. So finally cost accessible. The things as an investor that I look at for market traction is it comfortable? Is it cost? Can people afford it? And what is the content? And those are like when all those three come into high growth, or when they all hit, like that's when the masses will start using this technology. But there's a huge opportunity before then, like we were saying, with training and enterprises that are already seeing the ROI, with brands, with advertising, like so much opportunity before we even consider consumers.
Yeah, and we talked. There's a little bit of a focus on VR, but the point being is that all these things are kind of converging and changing all the time, and really it's about getting you guys thinking in 3D, and
Exactly.
So even though Torch is AR focused, what we really want you to do is to be able to just you yourself walk around your own thing and start constructing something in 3D and looking at the constraints of that and the opportunities of that. So it's actually applicable to VR too. So I would say if you're especially don't mind using a tablet or an iPhone, and even if you've got a VR idea, prototyping in an AR is not is actually a very cheap, fast way to go to get started. So actually, you were talking about. Let me make sure we're good on time. Okay, we got 10 minutes. I wanted to talk about I wanted to shift gears towards sound and AR. So you mentioned your book, but we should plug it a little bit more.
For sure.
And so,
But it's not only, so I only wrote a chapter, I should be clear. It's a massive book.
It's the best
and
chapter.
I have 8 pages. So, but seriously, the book is super useful for a complete overview of augmented reality in general.
Yep.
It's called Convergence, How the World Will Be Painted with Data. Isn't that a nice visual? Like, that sounds great. So definitely useful for you all. If you need a free code, you find me later
Wink,
to
wink.
download it digitally.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yeah, the cool thing is, I should have brought one. It actually has an augmented reality app. So when you look at the book and read the book, images pop up and talk to you, and it just makes it more fun. You guys have done some work like that, right? With
Yeah,
books?
where is Cami? There's Cami. She did our textbook. By the way, if you guys have seen any of our videos in the past few weeks and any of our example projects, Cami has built most of those herself from scratch and recorded the videos. That stuff is hard. Like making the content part is easy. Recording the video and
videos.
getting it out is the hard part. But so your focus in the chapter was around audio, right?
It was on audio, and the reason that I wrote it is that I think that audio beyond visuals plays a really important part. So this is allowing me to pitch to all of you designers and tell you to don't forget audio. We were talking about VR, and part of the reason that I think AR will be bigger than VR. There will be more use cases ultimately and eventually, I believe, and so do many. But what really helped me understand why AR it could be as big as it is that originally I didn't think AR could be very immersive. It couldn't transport you into a new location. I would always know that I'm sitting in this room even as I'm watching a digital overlay on top of it. And then when I saw Tonandi from Magic Leap and I heard, and the music was there and things were growing and I could interact with it, I realized how immersed I could be even with AR. Like if you're talking about a scale from 0 being not immersed, 10 being the most immersed you could ever be, I thought AR would get me to a 5 and I was at an 8. So that just, particularly again, I think because of sound. So that just, as you're looking and building AR-based experiences, don't forget sound because it can actually help tell the story. It can help the immersion factor. And even without visuals, and here's where I'll plug the Bose AR frames. And I have those later too if you want to see them. But that's where you can start creating augmented reality experiences without visuals and just with sound. And I think that that's one step towards this ultimate smart glasses, which is where, we would all like to be. But just starting to getting your heads up, removing yourself from your screen and interacting with the world on a digital layer, but using sound instead of visuals. But useful in both cases.
And to give you guys a little more sense of what we're talking about, the key term there is spatial audio. So, when you listen to headphones, you have stereo, and you can hear sometimes the music or the vocals will switch channels on you. You can hear it left or right. Spatialized audio actually has a sense of distance and position. And so the cool thing about that with a wearable, and the Bose do this, and the Hollands does this, and the Magic Leaps do this. If you have a virtual object stuck in space, and you can walk around it, and you feel like it's there, you can actually hear it in that position as well, even to the point where when you walk up to it, it doesn't just get louder. You can turn your head, and you can hear it in the other ear. The demo, we used to do this demo. I worked at Magic Leap for a little while. We used to do this demo where we would put you in a wearable, and there was this little character floating in front of you, and it made a little buzzing noise, and you could lean in and you could hear it. And then we'd say, okay, keep looking in that direction. We're going to randomly stick another one behind you somewhere, but we're not going to tell you where, and you have to find it. And we truly randomized it, so it would show up behind you in some random distance away and up and down. And it was crazy. People would immediately turn and look right where it was. There was no I'm not sure. Let me try to hear. It was like it's right up there. It's right down there. It's really powerful.
There's some basic interaction right now with these Bose AR glasses where if you're walking by a restaurant, you can turn and look at the restaurant and you'll get a basic set of information. Again, it's that beginning. It's that mobile website stage of we're just starting to figure out how all of these technologies can ultimately enhance businesses and human interaction.
And there's the other thing with that capability, our lizard brain just causes us to turn when we hear a sound. So you can actually direct people to look, which is, especially on a wearable. Today's wearables have smaller field of views, which means the person wearing them can see the whole environment, but the virtual content can only render in a certain area. And so you really don't want to have this like massive thing kind of clipped out and breaking the illusion. So what's a better experience is to have someone look around the room and feel like this virtual thing is in the room. The best way to get them to look around is to kind of draw audio in different directions. It's really powerful, and it always gets forgotten. I'm sad to say that's true for video games too. I worked on many video game projects where the poor audio people were always left out. So this is again, it's a blank slate. This is our opportunity to prioritize some of the transgressions of past industries, including the audio people.
It really just does make it for a better experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It,
If
yeah,
you
it
look
adds
at
a
like,
whole layer. It adds
yeah.
a whole layer that people just undervalue until they experience it.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Thanks.
We got it out there.
Thanks.
Any people that have audio production capabilities, get in there.
Now is your time.
So I wanted to take it back to WXR Fund and, the mission being invest in two of the greatest opportunities of our time, the future of computing and female entrepreneurs. So do you want to tell us more about that mission?
Yeah. I feel like this whole hour has been talking about that mission, but, I think hopefully we've sold you on the fact that this is the future of computing. There aren't many of these, right? They only happen every once in a while. So just take advantage of it. And like I was saying before, enjoy it. Things are going to change fast. It's going to feel slow. Torch 2.0 came out last month.
A few weeks ago, yeah.
A few weeks ago. Torch 3.0 is coming out tomorrow. I'm just kidding. Not that fast.
But soon.
But soon.
It's in progress.
Yeah, but honestly, as you're trying these things, as you're developing, if something isn't working out, just keep at it, keep trying. I don't think I didn't realize when we were going through the building of the internet and the shift to mobile, how much fun it could be to kind of play with that era of what's possible but unknown, right? And you guys are the perfect people to do that. So that's future of computing. And then investing in women is, like I was saying before, pretty obvious. We want to we're building something for all people, and so therefore we want all people involved. 2.4% of capital were invested in female-based companies last year. That's stupidly small, right? 11% of VCs are female. We're all trying to shift all of those things. And like I said, fortunately, we've had there's a very, very strong female gender-based community and diversity in general. In this space, and so we're lucky there, and we're gonna make it a change.
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier. I think the other part of this is this, again, early days reminds us of a lot of other early days, but everybody's really collaborative right now. So I think if you're probably like me, we're buried deep in VR, AR, Twitter. And there's the Slacks and the groups. There's a lot of community support. And, a lot of it is people that had a background like ours where we've seen some glimpse of what's coming and we know we can be a part of it. But the other part of it is people that are just like excited and they just want to do something in this space. And those people are really, I think, really well supported right now.
Yeah.
There's just tons of websites and materials, like even entering VR is like a perfect example of like, just how do I get started, which is interesting because all this stuff's changing really quickly, but I think our course is set at a really, really general level. It's just the technical details or the implementation details that are going to change. And I would, I think there was a, giving advice on anyone that's looking to apply that to a business problem. I kind of go back to what I said earlier of like, think about the connection between the physical and the digital. How can I, when someone is in a particular situation or context or trying to accomplish something, how can I tie these two elements together in a compelling, unique way using some of the things we know already, like their ability to interact. If they're on a smartphone, we know where they're the direction they're pointed, and we can let them tap on the glass. So there's some interesting opportunities there. In headsets, we talked about spatial audio and the ability to draw them around, but it's not doing it for the sake of doing it. What we really need right now is people thinking about the practical applications at that intersection between those, the physical and the digital.
Yeah, and to your point, 3 dimensions, right?
Yes.
That's the part that makes this so unique. It's not flat, right? I honestly think that any children that are born today, like any of you that might have small kids, like they'll ask us in the future, why did you use screens? Why
Yeah.
were things flat, right? Because we'll think in 3D. Like
Yeah.
the world will exist in 3D as we are. The digital world will exist in 3D.
I know it's so hard for people to imagine that now. I mean, that was
Yeah.
one of the kind of fundamental reasons for starting Torch, was to get people to realize you can still, the ultimate goal of a designer is to make choices for people to help them achieve their goals or bring them value in some way. And it's hard to break out of God, we've been dealing with screens for decades and decades. It's really fun to watch somebody use Torch for the first time, because the way you build a scene is you drag stuff into the room you're in. And it's really funny because usually people will just stand in one spot, especially a designer, and they'll want to line stuff up real nice and it'll look really beautiful. And then I'll say, like, take a couple steps that way or walk up to it, and you realize it's all like completely not where you think it is. You really have to walk around. Half of our office is cleared so people can walk around and work on their projects. And so it's just a totally different way of working and thinking. And we've seen it happen more and more as their minds get wrapped around what's possible. That's when the good ideas come out, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just coming up with, I want to make an AR thing,
Yeah.
without a motivation or understanding the constraints.
Yeah, my other piece of advice, I'm sure we're going to take questions soon, but my other piece of advice is just try a lot of things, because the more that you try, the more your brain will start thinking that way. So like as I was preparing for today, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if I had smart glasses and I could just see my little notes on the side? Like you just start thinking about what spatial computing could ultimately do and how your lives could be changed, or other people's lives could be changed once you're using it.
And some ideas are going to be awful, and you shouldn't
for
do
sure.
them. And I was like, we've come in, we've done that a little bit too at the office. We've helped people try to brainstorm, and everybody's like, oh, this is for this particular company, there's a particular thing, this is a no-brainer, this will try. And then you start to prototype it, and you're like, this is kind of lame. Like, I could use it on a screen, or I could I'm not really adding value through AR here. I'm just kind of showing AR stuff, and be willing to just say that, okay, if there's a more efficient way to do it, that's not an AR. AR is not going to make it better and that's really where we come in, is this idea of reducing the barriers to entry, so you're not so overly invested in a bad idea, you won't give it up.
Yeah, makes sense.
Find a good idea faster.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So either that, or people are going to make a ton of bad ideas.
That's okay too.
That's also okay. So are we time-wise Q&A?
Are we doing Q&A?
Yeah. We're just going to yell them out, I think. Yeah.
I can yell. I don't mind.
We can hear you.
Okay.
You're projecting well.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. My question is, what are you most excited for as a social impact that as the AR and VR comes, and what's the thing that scares you the most about its impact on society?
Social impact, I think it's going to be, the thing that I'm most excited about is connecting people even closer than they are today, right? That's kind of what Facebook did, and then it went backwards. But if I think about that concept of being able to be, and see, it's hard for me, I think about spatial computing as a whole, so it's hard for me to segment augmented reality versus virtual reality. But being able to even sit here, and we could have some other virtual folks sitting with us, and I could be here from San Francisco and having this conversation. All of that is really fascinating to me, whether it's in augmented or virtual reality, actually, just that. What scares me is the privacy issues and the ability to duplicate someone else's persona. We didn't talk about virtual beings much today, but virtual beings are being created out of nothing, out of AI, or you can, have your own avatar, or someone else could have your avatar, and what does that mean? So, so that's one of the biggest things that I think needs some conversation.
Yeah, for me, the most positive, hopeful thing I see is we're actually on the AR side in particular, but I think this is also true for VR. People are socializing more directly, meaning they're not hiding behind a profile and like a, and just text and a timeline. And I think we've all seen that some people kind of hide behind that. But when you're in a VR situation, actually, shout out Jessica Outlaw, she researches a lot of this stuff. The thing with AR is like watching people come together in the same physical space and share an experience. And so I think a lot of people are afraid of, we're zombies walking around with our phones all the time, and people just get lost in their phones. But what we're seeing with AR is if you're sharing an experience, you're holding a little magic window into that experience, but we all feel connected outside of the screen. And then there is this other super interesting thing, which I talk about frequently, is this idea of sharing the physical space with people at the same time as sharing remote people. So I think it's just bringing more humanity into the interaction is a big positive, I hope. And kind of similar to Amy's concerns around really what's happening, if you really get a real high level technology, our interaction with technology is getting fuzzier and fuzzier. It's no longer just this screen you sit at, this laptop you sit down at. It's gonna become more and more a part of your ambient, just as we're sitting here, like even the idea of like as I'm sitting here I'm getting information. And so on one hand that's super powerful and exciting. On the other, it also opens us up to a lot of vulnerabilities. I think so. Like it's the trade-offs there around what makes me a better person, but what also opens me up for like people with not positive intentions. What can they do with that capability?
And there are people thinking about it today. So there are groups talking about it, and there are people thinking about it. So hopefully we can get some answers as we're building the foundation of this technology.
Again, I think the good news is we've all gotten a little burned from stuff in the past, and so like this particular discussion is very active in our industry right now, and like a lot of people are starting to raise up like, should we agree as a community on some of the rules of engagement around this stuff, like ethics, kind of policies and social contracts. It's already starting to be talked about, which again goes back to this. We're seeing maturity in the space, and there people are thinking ahead, thankfully.
You mentioned storytelling earlier, and I'm curious if you've got examples of community storytelling using VR.
Community storytelling.
Community storytelling, like
So I worked one of like a cemetery. I believe it's Fields in Los Angeles, where you come with the hardware and you can actually hear people's stories.
Oh, right.
At the base.
Yeah, so the question's about community, like people telling stories to each other using these technologies in the context of location and direct sharing between people. One example that comes to mind, there's an independent filmmaker. She did a coverage of the private run prison systems, and the communication systems are also privately controlled, and it's really awful, and it's a bad story. But essentially, she focused on this one family, and it was a father was incarcerated, and he had a family of 2 or 3 kids, and the mom was at home. And the communication through the prison system communication was very limited, and these kids were very young. So the mother created a cardboard cutout, life-size cardboard cutout of the father, and just put it in the house. And they saw the kids respond to that. Like it just like they had a physical kind of totem, or that they could address. And so she wanted to take it further, and so she wanted to apply AR to that. And so they actually figured out a way to get into a visit with the incarcerated and record a video that was good enough to be kind of chroma keyed out or green screened out, and then they had him read stories to the kids, and so the kids could actually place him in the home and interact with him, and they were going to do a two-way messaging thing. So I think the story part of that made me think of the storybook, but I think that's like a good combination of what combine these technologies for things that have been difficult to do in the past, right?
Yeah. Not as so much on the storytelling side, but at least on the collaboration or community side, there's an app called Blue Sky. And so you could like write in the sky, and like I could leave a message for you all in the Portland sky and augmented reality. So that's kind of interesting. And then certainly a lot in just general storytelling, right? This is a great new medium for storytelling. So an example of a woman that's creating an experience that's retelling the story of Marie Antoinette, because she actually didn't say let them eat cake, and her story was actually vastly different than we all know. So creating that experience to almost reteach history.
Yeah, the other part of it is, again, tying physical to digital, and there's some public spaces projects where, we see these bronze statues everywhere, and you just kind of walk past them, maybe read the placard, but you don't really get a sense of like the whole story. And so this does open up an opportunity to, like, in the moment, get a much richer story told too. So you're not just reading text, and you've got audio, and which is powerful, and video. So telling stories on the spot, I think, is a huge interesting capability too.
Do you have any stories or specific examples of where AR or VR has just made a really massive, like, game-changing impact? And it's just completely broken down walls or barriers for problems that people have had?
There's a company that I just met with recently called Behavior Me, and they're working with kids and autism and teaching them how to better, more easily function with society, cross the street safer, just like interact with other people. That one's, I think, really impactful. It's changing lives. Lots of them. There's the one that I'm thinking VR now. I can't think of
Yeah,
AR.
yeah. The VR one, like the telemedicine thing. Like there's a lot of stuff around. The one example I give is, or actually, let's back it up even further. So, like, the one thing we thought about a lot, especially in the early days, was how we perceive reality. And if you think about our hearing and our sight, we're creating these electrical signals to our brain, and we're kind of building up a model of our reality in our head at any given time. And really, we're starting to manipulate that a little bit, and that could be negative, but like a positive version of that was actually, it was they found that people that had lost a limb, and they had the phantom limb syndrome, but like this one particular soldier, he lost his limb in a very traumatic incident, and so even though he no longer had it, it felt contracted and painful, and it was like tensed, even though it didn't exist. And he couldn't, because basically that was the last signal his brain got. And so there was nothing closing the circuit to say that's not happening anymore. And so it's called the mirror box experiment, really old experiment. You can look it up on Wikipedia. But they basically put a mirror in front of the guy and pointed it towards his full limb, and it mirrored and gave his brain something to latch onto, like he was in control of it, he had agency, and it looked like his other. And so the interesting part about that, and there's a point here, I promise, when his brain saw the hand, it just turned off that pain. It turned it completely, like it, so that, and I think I think it took a lot of sessions and things like that, but it wasn't this instant miracle, but it pointed to this interesting thing around our perception system and how we can control it. So the other version of that, it was a lot of talk around burn victims, and during their skin grafts or painful treatments, or if they had these burning sensations, putting them in VR and putting them in a cool environment, and it actually relieved their pain without painkillers. So VR in particular, and probably because that have immersive aspect, has been super impactful in the medical industry.
Presence is also really a big Dr. Davis over at the University of Oregon has done a lot of work studying Second Life, and she has people in her community who have Parkinson's, who are 80 years old, or who have severe cerebral palsy and are stuck in their houses. and VR experiences in these connected communities gives them that, takes it beyond the phantom limb and gives them mobility again, and gives them community and the ability to get out of their houses that they just haven't had. So there's superhuman impact that's happening in some of those cases.
And then greater world impact, or I mean, we talked a lot around people and giving them accessibility and relief, but then there's also just like, I mean, as far from my perspective, you're asking me like in the early days of the web, how will this be impactful to some businesses? And I'm just like, it's gonna be a part of every business. Like this will be the next big computing platform where most people will be, and so it's going to open up all these huge things we don't even know yet, really, like the interactions and the things people want to do. We haven't. It's still pioneer days in a lot of ways. You had a question?
So this is going to be possibly two different questions.
Okay.
Two different questions, because one is for me, and then one is from someone who I talk a lot about AR and VR with. So my question is integration into video production. Is there that? And then this is a much more technical and possibly specific question from my friend down in LA. So our eyes are way better at stabilization when an image is present than mobile devices are, and so objects that are tracked into ARs tend to be less stabilized and therefore feel less natural. So is there anything that developers can do, and maybe even specifically the Torch app is doing, to counteract that and compensating for that increased stabilization?
Okay, yeah, those are two. So we'll do, no, it's good. So the first one, video, so we released support for video in Torch a long time ago, but it is super powerful. It's still a very rich way to tell, a linear story, or, pieces of a story with imagery and layers and texture. We've actually been using video in some parts, not even as the primary delivery, but to just give some interest to the ambient kind of effects, even from, assuming you mean just like getting video into AR, not actually editing and producing video in that environment, which is a whole other, that'd be a whole, that possibly, like video production, you're always looking for more screen space, right? And we're very spatially minded people, so if you could start to lay out your projects spatially around you, like over here's my clips I'm working with, over here's my preview, and here's my timeline. Like, I mean, all that's up for your grabs. But we encourage, especially with us, with Torch, we work a lot with people that are already doing digital experiences on screens, and we tell them, don't get bogged down in the 3D part. Let the 3D part be the navigation and pull in 2D stuff. 2D reads really well. Text comes across great. Video is a very familiar thing to a lot of people. So even though it's kind of floating in space, that's okay. It's actually cool in a lot of ways. We've attached video to physical objects. So I think video's got a lot of mileage. Do you have any thoughts on it?
I agree.
Okay, good.
We're not done with video.
No, not by a long shot.
And that even goes to, talk about virtual reality, like 360 video is some people call it VR, some people don't, but it's a way to be immersive.
Yeah, I did a blog post about this. The social platforms are very video driven right now, right? You think about Snapchat and Instagram. They have these AR functionalities, but the whole output is to record a video of yourself and share the video. And so right now there's the balance is towards generating more video content, so we can stick more ads in there, obviously. But I do think that there'll be a flip at some point where the video is just your preview of the experience. It's not the output, and it actually takes you into the AR side, and your actual interactions
like a portal.
Yeah, you're actually. True. That was a great question about stabilization. Some of that is performance, and it depends on. It could be case by case, depending on the device you're on and the project you're building. But there are things you can do to make something feel more anchored in the space. When we were doing glasses stuff, we call it pixel sticking the pixel in the world. Occlusion helps a lot, and what that means is, so like if I stuck a virtual object here between Amy and I, and then I pushed it a few meters that way, technically it should be on the other side of that wall, and it should disappear because that's what a physical object would do. Most experiences today, and I don't think this will be true for very long, would still render that object even though it's technically far away. And you get this mismatch between, well, I'm moving and I would expect it to move. I can't tell if it's close or if it's behind the wall because it's just not getting clipped out or occluded. And there's a bunch of companies working on this, and we've shown some early demos of this, but that is coming. But in the meantime, you have to be really aware of that can cause a lot of content to look odd. Even though it's functional and it's there, the distance may not be correct. It goes back to that point I made earlier about always be moving around in the space to where you think things are, double check and look from different sides. The other part of that's shadows. So we're very, visually, we expect to see a shadow as a reference point. So we find shadows on physical planes. So again, back to my example, that object is floating up in the air, but when I look down, I should see a shadow casted on the ground. So those two things are the most important for mobile AR or smartphone AR. It gets a little more interesting with wearable AR because now you're getting stereoscopic view, which means that you're getting an image in your left eye and your right eye, just like you ever do the camera 1, camera 2 thing with your thumb. You're doing that with virtual, and so what that means is you get a more of a innate sense of depth, but still occlusion is really important. But most of the devices that are doing stereo do occlusion already. So I would say if you're seeing oddly placed stuff in a current AR experience, a lot of it will be either from performance of the device or this lack of occlusion or more cues of location.
Is occlusion spelled the way I think it is?
OCC.
Thank you.
Young man in the back.
I just want to add to that, content optimization will help with that too. If you have really light content, then your device is it's not going to have to render so much and slow down. It's doing a lot of stuff to try to keep that stuck.
Right.
So if you have really good clean content, low polygon, efficient use of textures, then you'll have a better experience.
Okay, thanks. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
I was just going to comment on this in response to the video creation. Years ago, we were doing a project in Mumbai. We had to meet, I'm an AV consultant, and we had to meet with a Christie Projectors, and their rep flew in from Mumbai, and I met with him, and we were discussing, projectors and possibilities of things, and he had told us how they helped elect their new prime minister by creating a hologram. And Christie Projectors helped him create a hologram, and he went to all of these small villages, multiple holograms to all these small villages, and gave a speech to people who hadn't even seen it on TV.
Yep.
And landslide victory.
Yeah. Well, he's magic. He's
Exactly.
Alexa wizard. Yeah.
And it was one of the most startling, because it is augmented reality. They were looking in real space, and as an AV consultant, I'm constantly trying to think of where to break down the barriers of being a insular experience or being a shared experience, collaborating with other people in a shared space and shared reality. So I was wondering if you could comment on that, but I just wanted to bring that up because that's a video, a great video content creation of creating holograms. Yeah. And since then we've been asked a few times about that, and anyway, just wanted to get your input on.
Yeah, the interesting part for me, and again, it goes back to this whole blank slate and new possibilities. One thing I really like, I'd mentioned earlier about the social shared experience aspect, where we could all be in this room and having some shared experience above us, and we're all agree that, we're all mutually agree that we're seeing the same thing. But if you think about it, we're all viewing it, whether we were doing it through glasses or a mobile phone, we're viewing it through our individual devices. So socially, we're having a shared experience, but there's interesting opportunities, and I really don't think people have pushed on this hard enough. There's moments where the experience could become deeply personalized, where we're seeing stuff together, but then some part of the experience actually directly addresses you. So a real simple example of this is in Torch. When you drag a 2D asset into the space, it just stays as a flat plane, which means you can walk around it and you can see the thin edge of it and the backside of it, which is not always desirable. So there's a feature you can turn on called face camera, and when you turn it on, that thing will dynamically always face you, so you can't walk around the backside of it. It's really handy for text and stuff. Well, what kind of blows people's minds is when you tell them, when we're all looking, because we have a collaborative aspect, we're all in the project together, and I say, that image is actually facing all of us at the same time. And so we all agree that that thing is there, and it's all facing us. So what does that mean? Like, yeah, is it, it's looking at you, but it's looking at me also. So like the blend between, there's so much opportunity in that little window.
Yeah, just to add to that, I was at an immersive design conference in San Francisco recently, and to the uniqueness perspective, they were talking about how we were in this era of materialism where it was all about we had to get the brand and buy the object, and it was gathering things. And then that kind of shifted into this era of experience, the Instagram, the amazing coffee, the traveling experiences. But really, it's about what you're experiencing. And then the proposal was we're going to go into this era of uniqueness, and where all of our experiences and our material items will be unique to us. And that's being enabled today with the technologies, but also this combination of AI. And so I think that's really, really valid, and I think that's something to think about as you guys are designing things as well.
Yeah. This I started following this guy after the Snapchat Summit last week, and he's an artist, a digital artist, and all of his online posts, he's built his own face filter. It's his own creation, and I haven't yet seen a post from him that wasn't this avatar on top of his real body doing his normal daily things, but he's creating basically a personality through this like one channel. So like there's super interesting stuff around personalization, but also how you're expressing yourself out. And yeah, I know that wasn't totally a part of the question, but it was an interesting thread on that.
What's the name of the artist?
That was I'll let you know after because I.
Me too.
Okay. One more. Hey, Charlotte.
I had a question. You mentioned about female founders and how small of a percentage of the funding that's out there. Would you have any specific advice to female founders in terms of dealing with getting funding and being in that world that's obviously so small in terms of how the funding goes to them?
Don't give up. I really do think things are changing right now. We are seeing a shift. That 2.4% is more than it was the year before. I can't remember the exact statistic.
1.7.
Yeah. Build a network across all genders, but particularly female genders, because we're doing what we can right now to support growth in that space.
This is on Instagram. He's on other stuff, and now that I look at his profile, you can't see his real face. It is EGYDA_digital thing.
Wait,
EGYDA.
Yep. Egida. EGYDA_.
D as in dog?
Yes. Digital. He looks like this.
Tweet it on the torch. Tweet it on the torch.
Yeah, we'll tweet it on the Torch account.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, that was a fast one. Maybe one.
Haka.
Sure. Thank you so much. It was a very helpful talk. My question is about enterprise market. We had like a quick conversation about the training. So now we know that like there's like a right balance between the consumer-facing experience and like in AR and VR and enterprise. Maybe enterprise is a little bit less. But how do you see the future? Like, do you think the balance will be super different, like in 2022, like enterprise will catch up and like go upper, or it still will be in the same level?
The way I think about enterprise, I'll start.
No.
So the way that, if I think about where I got my first laptop, and this might not be the case with you guys, but where I got my first laptop and where I got my first cell phone, both of them were from work, right? And so a lot of times I'm thinking about as we get the new VR headset or AR smart glasses, like it will probably start in the enterprise because things will be expensive and the use cases will build there and then eventually move home. That's not always the case, right? There's a lot of VR headsets, 4.2 million PSVR headsets out there right now, or, so there's a lot of that. But I do think enterprise is key to mass adoption of both technologies.
Yeah, I agree that I think we've shown interest as consumers through the social channels that we're interested in engaging in these new things. And so that's created enough traction to where, again, we're seeing the trend more towards the marketing side first. And what we're seeing a lot right now is forward-thinking companies are willing to do like proof of concepts and prototypes and tests. The more we can iterations of that we can do, the more the truly compelling interactions and opportunities will stick, and that creates that flywheel, that gravitation. More consumers will come that way, right? Think about, like, again, back to the first iPhone, like a bunch of people got it just because it was the Apple device to get, and once you got it, it was basically you could maybe browse the web very slowly and listen to your music, which you could only do on an iPod before that. Like, it was pretty limited. And then enough people got it to where they were pushing, communication. So companies will figure out how to connect to new customers or extract value out of the platform. And we're at that inflection point now, I think. All this technology, really, and we didn't really talk about this a whole lot, all the pieces have been here for a little while. I mean, ARKit and AR Core, which is what a lot of this stuff runs on now, which was provided by Apple and Google, is built at the OS level on these phones, came out fall 2017. AR has been around since 2012, this mobile phone version of AR. We just have now found like enough of the kind of connections are being formed to start laying stuff on top of that. Our foundation's being laid. It was very technical, very hard to get into, a lot of friction. We're reducing the friction. More consumers are getting into it through social channels, which is a great warm-up. Enterprises are testing out the engagement and the response they get through marketing. The more they get their hands on it, the more they can see it. So that's like we try to show use cases or examples that are inspiring, but we don't try to project the use case, because really the domain expert is going to be the one that's like, wait a minute, you're telling me I can have a shared experience and an individual experience? Well, I'm a salesperson. I sell heavy equipment, and this would be a cool way to visualize the 100,000 different configurations of a tractor without me. Or we're going to a trade show and we don't want to ship a pallet of our wares to this trade show floor. I can actually have people super engaged, and I can customize it for each person. I can scale up what I can do. The other real quick example around scale was like, because we talked a lot about training, but like even we talked to a sports team. They do a photo thing at the beginning of the season where you take your picture with the mascot, and it costs so much money and time to have like a physical thing set up. So they still want to do that, but they also want to allow people that don't want to go through that to give them a similar experience. There's an AR application there, so we'll start to see it's like chipping away. It just feels like the chips are getting bigger lately. That's what from our perspective.
It's exciting.
What's next?
Were there any last thoughts?
Thanks so much for having
Thank
me.
you. And thank you to Nathan. Our marketing team. We got a lot of torch people here.
Can we get the torch people to stand up in case people have questions for the app?
That's Tara, our director of design, Tony, co-founder and CEO, and Cami, who's been building all of our cool projects lately. And where's Keith? There he is. Yeah, well, you're dark. You take away light.
But seriously, use the app, download it, play with it, experiment with it.
Thank you.
I know this isn't about torch, but I'm not. We really need people to explore and experiment, and you guys, being the creative bone, are the people that need to start doing it. So don't give up.
And thanks, Nathan, for putting this together.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I wanted to give you just a couple minutes to connect with each other before we all have to go on to our day jobs. So thank you so much. It's been an awesome conversation.
Yeah.